There is so much information out there that even the truth tellers can fall victim to disinformation. Scott Galloway happens to be somebody that I absolutely love. Recently, an interview he did on MSNBC went pretty viral.
Point of having all this money, if you aren't at some point going to show some fidelity as a 40 or a 50-something-year-old man that has the wealth of the GDP of a Latin American nation to actually standing up and showing some fidelity to American values. Bezos has got the yacht. Tim Cook, Jensen Huang at NVIDIA is worth more than Intel or Boeing. At what point? When do the men show up here? When do the Americans show up here? So this is not only incredibly shocking but not disappointing from Trump, but where's the leadership? Where are the men that have such blessings and such prosperity from the rule of law and capitalism and competition? And we don't need more mergers and acquisitions. We need more breakups. One company owns 2/3 of all social media globally. Meta. One company has 93% of all share of all search. Google. And if you don't think every day we don't pay higher prices, one company has 50% of all e-commerce, Amazon.
He was pretty upset the day that Mark Zuckerberg announced that he would no longer be offering fact-checking on Facebook. He happens to be a professor who is very wealthy and done very well for himself, but still has some compassion, and his politics reflect it. When I was listening to Raging Moderates, a podcast that he's involved with, and I started to hear some of those red flags that usually go on around some macroeconomic levels, I was shocked. I'd never heard him say anything that I hadn't been able to factually prove or that didn't go along with what I already believed. Now, this is the thing. I can fall victim to disinformation too, and everything that I might believe might not be correct either. That's why I do fact checking. And that's why I try to offer you the facts here at this channel. So when he said these words, I did a little bit of checking. So let's check it out. Here's the clip that I'm referring to.
I think the deficit is a super interesting one because deficits seem to be always really high up in terms of concerns of the party not in control, right?
He's absolutely right. It's very interesting to me how particularly the Republicans make a big deal about deficit spending and adding to the debt when there happens to be a Democrat in the White House. When the tables turn, you just don't hear anything. Now, Democrats do that too, but they tend not to be as boisterous about everything. But back to the podcast.
And it is a huge issue. I've always said that, or not always, but I do believe that the largest tax increase in history is that from George Washington to George Bush, $7 trillion in deficits. The Trump administration of the first one, $8 trillion, and Biden wasn't much better.
I'd never heard that before, the whole Washington to Bush thing. So I did a little bit of research. And I had a hard time tracking down the exact numbers, but as I was doing the research around that, I thought to myself, well, it's really not fair if we don't inflate some of those historic dollars. For example, in 1945, under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, he racked up a deficit of $258 billion. Now, by today's standards, we think that's nothing. 258 billion would be a dream today. But this is also like 80 years ago. If we inflate that value, we arrive at a figure closer to 4.5 trillion, way higher than most of our recent deficits. Oh gosh, I am so sorry to pop in like this. It won't take very long. But if you're liking this video, if you enjoy this content, please subscribe. I want to make sure I see you back here again. And if you'd like this video, it'll make sure it gets out to other people. And I'm interested in building a channel that gives you the content that you're interested in. So if there happens to be a topic or material in this that you'd like me to expand on, please put it in the comments below. I'll make sure I get to it. Plus, I'd like to chat with you. Now, back to the regular program. Now, the resources that I looked all of that up are going to be in the doobly-doo description below, so you can check it out yourself. I also did a little research and found this graph, which also had inflated a number of the deficits, but this one only inflated them to the year 2000, so 25 years ago. But still, it'll give you a more accurate view. And these are the sorts of things that even when we hear people throw out numbers and statistics, we want to keep our analytical brain on so that we can make sure that we're really assessing the information. Back to the video.
And all that is pulling prosperity forward from younger people such that my generation can stay wealthy, right?
Let's talk about this whole theory of making older people richer on the backs of younger people. It depends on why we're taking on the debt. Just like with our personal finances, if we're taking on the debt in our personal finances for a bunch of lattes and paying interest on that and pushing it forward to the future, probably not the best deal. But if we're taking on debt to build a business that'll be long time sustaining, generating an income for us and maybe some other people, well, that's a little bit different. And this is the other thing that I'd like you to consider. If I die with debt in place, but I have enough money for my heirs to pay for it, is that really such a problem? I mean, maybe you think it's a problem, but personally, if I have, say, $170,000 left on my mortgage, but I am going to leave my heirs $500,000, what difference does it make? They're still going to inherit $330,000. And the same holds true for the national debt. Yes, if the next generation has to take on debt, that's not very great. But if we did it to build a better economy, essentially that people are educated and that our lands are well taken care of and that people can get from here to there and do their commerce, that's kind of like leaving my heirs a business and a way to pay off the debt. Back to the video.
At some point, someone's going to have to pay this thing. And now the debt, or the interest on the debt, is now greater than our military expenditures.
That was the place that made me pause. You see, the rest of it, I was kind of taking it in and I was thinking, wow, that is a big increase on debt, but not that big of a deal, and this and that and the other thing. And I was thinking about his comment about making the next generation pay for the debt of this generation, which I do have some concerns about too, because we have not managed that debt well. We'll talk about that. But when he got to this whole thing about us spending more money on interest for the debt versus national defense, I thought to myself, I just did a video on that. I just did a bunch of research. By the way, the other video that I had regarding that will be linked below. But let's look at some of the new research. Because again, I thought to myself, Scott doesn't give disinformation. He does not. And the only time he might give a fact or a figure that's inaccurate or a point of view that's inaccurate is generally because he has, like all of us, fallen victim to some disinformation or misinformation. The last time I did this research, I went to the US Treasury, the people who write the checks. Every time something's got to get paid, it goes through the U.S. Treasury, and they're pretty good about keeping track of where it's going. This time I went to the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. After all, Congress is the entity in our federal government system that decides what we're going to spend our pennies on. And so they're also an integral part of this whole process. If you notice here for 2024, last year, we spent $826 billion on defense, DOD, military. And you'll notice right below that, it says interest on the debt, $949 billion. And I was so depressed. After all, I had just created an entire video showing people who subscribe to this channel and anyone out in the internet world who can get access to it that we are not spending more on interest on the debt than we are for national defense. And yet here before me on these numbers, it says something else. I noticed that it also has an amount here for veteran affairs. That's $325 billion. Clearly, if we add the 325 to the 800 billion and some change, we arrive at a number that's bigger than the amount that we're paying for interest on the debt. But interest on the debt is getting close to $1 trillion. Hopefully, we'll be able to continue to decrease interest rates so that that won't have as large an impact. And this is the other thing to keep in mind with the interest on that debt. And this goes for your personal finances too. As long as we're paying interest on things that ultimately bring us greater wealth or betterment, well, that might not be a bad thing. At any moment in time, we want to assess, is that interest worth it? Is taking on debt and taking on that next step going to be worth it in the long run? I want you to click this video right here to learn more about what sorts of expenses help build our economy and help you as an American, because we haven't necessarily spent all these dollars wisely. So click on that video and I'll see you there.